Rise, darling. No need for the pomp and circumstance.
The Death Star will be completed on schedule.
Oh, Vady, baby. How frightfully splendid. Finally, we can get rid of all those ghastly fake watches in one fell swoop. Oh, yes, and be a good Sith Lord and click like on TGV's video.
As you wish.
Okay, hi guys, and welcome to the show. And today it's time for my top 10 annual watches to avoid. If you're familiar with the channel, you'll know that every year I do this list. There has been some movements. We've got a new number one. Some things have actually left the top 10 because unfortunately we also have some new entries as well. Now, before I get into this, I'll do a quick wristwatch check. I'm wearing the Mission Impossible Casio. I can't take this thing off. Well, I did to wear my new Seiko the other day, but immediately I put it back on. I just love it, and I'm wearing it on this new Hirsch rubber strap, and it's just the most comfortable, practical, unpretentious tool watch of all time. I just love it. So there you go. If you missed the review, have a look back. I'll put the link somewhere. It will magically appear through the glory of editing. It'll be there. Anyway, so there we go. It's a very simple list. The closer we get to number one, the higher the risk, the higher the severity of the situation, and the more you should avoid this type of watch. Okay, so number 10 is paying retail. I must make this distinction. If you want the retail experience, you know, the champagne, the being treated like royalty, well, you should be. The boutique experience, as they call it, that's absolutely fine. I think that you're definitely entitled to. However, you are going to be paying an arm and a leg for that experience. I say buy smart, buy used if you can. And I must make this distinction as well. I'm not endorsing the grey market. On the contrary, I think the grey market comes in really at number 11. It's just kind of pushed out by this because I'm seeing a lot of people buying retail. It's still going on, paying prices they could have saved on if they just did a little bit of research, digging about online. You can get it from some very reputable sellers, and there are authorized dealers as well. I'll give you an example like Moyers, who I've personally bought and sold to, and authorized dealers for many prestigious brands. You can work with them, you can negotiate. Obviously, don't lowball them and be rude about it, but there's some great sellers out there. So do a bit of hunting about, and once you establish that relationship, then you can have a little bit of a discount too. Okay, number 9 is rushed buys. Now, what I mean by that, sometimes we can, and I'm sure if you're anything like me, you've probably done this, up late, maybe you had a few drinks, drunk buying. That's not a good idea either. You might have a quick kind of crush on something and lust after it. Well, the next morning, it sounds like I'm talking about something else. You might regret it. You want to look for real love, so take your time. I found that I will fixate about a watch. I will lust after a watch, sometimes for even weeks at a time, months even, and then it would just dissipate and I'll move on. So that wasn't true love, was it? And then there's watches that you kind of put off, you're not sure about, you don't really experience, and then you get in the flesh and you just head over heels. This is a keeper. I can feel it in my bones, and I know that feeling because I get this feeling that, why am I buying any other watch? Why don't I sell my whole collection? Just keep an Explorer and this, and maybe my Squale. What am I saying? You see what I'm saying? But it makes me consider that. It makes me kind of question what I'm doing. That's when you know you got a really great watch. Anyway, whole different subject. Okay, number 8, difficult to service watches. This can come in a variety of different ways. It can just be a watch, a brand perhaps that has a very particular case, style of hands, components that are difficult to source and replace if something goes wrong, or most of the time it's movement related with mechanical watches, actually even some quartz pieces as well. And more often than not, this happens with the more obscure watches, or especially watch brands that are defunct, that are no longer exist. And it kind of makes me appreciate the good old ETA movements. You know, those are so affordable to maintain and service with any decent watchmaker. But with vintage watches, for example, I did a whole video about this. Let's say the crystal gets cracked and it's a very particular size. Sometimes that's difficult to source. Some brands are easier than others. For example, Omega, there's plentiful parts on the secondary market. And if you have a good watchmaker, and this is very important to have a relationship with a good watchmaker, they can source the parts, they have the connections. But I'll give you a really great example of a complication you kind of want to avoid, unless obviously your heart's really into it. I used to own what's called a Dubé and Sheldon brand rattrapante, or rattrapante if you want to be correct about it. It did the split seconds in a very interesting way on the dial of the watch rather than in the actual movement. Now, it was functioning. However, it's an obscure brand. That's something to look out for. Secondly, it's an obscure complication. It's not your typical, it's not like a GMT or a day date on an ETA-based movement. Had I have wanted to service it, who knows if I'd be able to even find a replacement for that spring that was mounted on the dial. Okay, number 7 is buying for investment only. This obsession with the value of a watch, seeing it only as simply a commodity. I mean, in my opinion, it's a borderline vulgar, really. Let's be honest. These are tools to be used. Sometimes they're actual works of art that you should enjoy. This mentality of buying them, putting them in the safe, never touching them. I mean, look, if that's your thing, who am I to argue with? But I find it a little bit sad, and to see them only as a commodity, there's so much better things to invest your money in if you want to invest in something, you know. To me, those kind of people that treat watches like they're something on the stock market, they're not enthusiasts. With that mindset, as we've covered in many videos before about watch snobbery, it is a slippery slope to that, because then you only see watches, or start to see watches, as a commodity. Now, I want to be very, very clear here. I'm not advocating that the value is not an important part of buying a watch. It is important, but it shouldn't be the only thing. Definitely take it into consideration. There are brands that depreciate, and then there are brands that hold their value or even gain their value. You know, but to me, it's a bonus. It doesn't define the watch. Buying a watch only for its value, you're not going to have a connection, the same connection. You've got to love the piece. You've got to want to wear it. You want to enjoy it, surely, right? Okay, number 6. This does kind of permeate into fashion watches. Well, they're just taking advantage, brands like Daniel Wellington and Movement and all the rest of them. So I don't have to pontificate about the virtues of buying something respectable for sometimes even less money. But this is a relatively new phenomenon. Now, obviously, I'm going to have fashion watches on this list, but recently I've been noticing this new trend. At a quick glance, you think it's a G-Shock or a Casio or a Databank or a whatever, but it's not. It's made by some brand you've never heard of, and trust me, the quality is terrible. It's a false economy, just a few bucks more. Buy the Casio F91W, buy the real icon of horology, a design legend, with the illustrious history, with some actual real provenance to it. And this new trend tends to happen with brands like Timex, Casio, Seiko, Orient, and they are making great strides at capturing back the market, the young people. I mean, look at what Seiko's doing with the 5KX, whether you like it or not. It's a bold, great move. Timex are making great strides with Pac-Man watches and these more kind of accessible and even automatics and stuff, which is great to see. So don't waste your money on these no-name brands, these fashion Casio imitation watches. Amazon is absolutely chock-a-block full of them. So honestly, save your money, spend 10, 20 bucks more, get the real thing. Number 5, we have a new entry, and I didn't really address this last year, but I think it's something that is becoming even more pervasive on YouTube, and this is when YouTubers turn into watch dealers. They spend a couple of years collecting, and suddenly they think they're experts and gurus and all the rest of it. Now, I want to make it abundantly clear here. I am not a watch dealer. I never want to be a watch dealer. I never said I will be, and it will never happen. The reason is because it takes a huge amount of knowledge, experience, because it's not just knowing about the watches, it's knowing how to deal with customers that have issues, etc., etc. It's not something you want to get into overnight. It's a lifelong commitment, and there are tons of great watch dealers, many of them authorized dealers. Then there are people that are specialists in particular styles or prices or genres, like my friend Kenny at Triad Vintage Watches, for example, or Mark at Long Island Watch, who, if you're looking for Seikos, Orients, that kind of thing, Timex, I forget, he's got so many great brands. He's an authorized dealer. Now, I know you're probably going to say, oh, what about you and the TGV tax? Well, listen, if we're going to talk about the Flightmaster, I've loved that the Flightmaster for almost a decade now. I simply shared it on my channel. I don't get anything in return from Seiko. Seiko don't even know who I am. So what, am I going to sell a Flightmaster for $50 more than I bought it for? No. I'm keeping it, you know. So there's nothing to gain. It's just that sometimes with my channel I kind of shine a little light, you know, with my modest sized audience. They you know, they recognize that it's a great watch and I love it, and they want a great watch too. So we're just sharing the passion. It's very, very different. You know, and this is another reason why I never will be a watch dealer. I'm not interested. And yeah, I sell and buy watches, but those are my own watches. To really be a great watch dealer, it takes commitment. It takes a sense of morality. It takes integrity. You cannot be a watch dealer and have a YouTube channel. It's two separate things. You have to decide, because if you review a watch and you're a watch dealer, then that review, no matter if you're selling the watch or not, there's not going to be any journalistic, you know, we're getting into very muddy waters here. Again, that's another reason why I avoid the whole thing. I will always be just an enthusiast, not a connoisseur, not an aficionado. I'm just a watch fan like you, sharing my passion. And while we're on the subject of Mark, I think he's a great example of somebody doing it well with his educational series Watch and Learn, where he teaches you from his engineering perspective things about the watch, stuff that is beyond my my academically challenged brain, like how to make computations on a sliding scale of a Flightmaster, for example, you know, this kind of stuff. Okay, number 4 is redials, and this seems to be increasing, and there's several reasons why. First of all, and this is very simple, the amount of untouched, naturally patinaed dials is decreasing, and that's because, well, it's for obvious reasons. These watches are discontinued, they're not manufactured anymore. When we're talking vintage watches, there's only a finite amount of them, so it was inevitable that finding a good example of an untouched dial is going to get more difficult. The second reason is because there's an increase of watch dealers. As our hobby expands, and as watch dealers quickly source and grab up all the good examples, making it harder to find a good untouched, restored. Sometimes they like to say this, you know, they use certain terms to kind of get around it, but it's basically a painted dial. And don't get me wrong, it can be very, very subtle sometimes. Pay close attention, make sure you do as much research as you can. And I have been caught out myself. Sometimes it's not even the text, sometimes it's just lume being reapplied, this kind of thing. I've got stung. I'm the first to admit whenever I've made a mistake. Unfortunately, the watch stopped working. It was a vintage Zenith. I didn't see the point of taking it to a watchmaker, spending hundreds, you know, almost more than the cost of buying it in the first place, to get it working again. I can't sell it because I would be just as bad as the person who sold it to me in the first place. So in the end, I had to destroy it. It was the only honorable thing to do. So I lost money there, but I learned a valuable lesson. So nobody's infallible. Okay, number 3 is hyped up watches that are eventually price gouged. What I mean by this, and this is getting worse as well, this is kind of this has started in the last few years, well, from what I've seen, and it's really got to do with the death of true independent watch journalism. And the reason is because, if you've noticed, a lot of and this is why I don't follow any of the big Well, there's a few exceptions to this, but most of the time, these big watch magazines, they've basically turned into fronts for their own watch stores. And that creates a big problem because it undermines their own journalistic integrity, and they're just basically glorified watch stores now. And what happens is they do collaborations with watch brands. Watch brands want to sell their watches. They go to these established magazines and they make a limited edition. They sell out, and then you get unscrupulous watch dealers who bulk buy and then charge in exorbitant amounts to really hungry watch fans. Now you could say, well, that's my choice if I want to spend such and such on a watch. And absolutely, this is another reason why I like to stick to watch blogs that are made by fans, because you get this really honest, enthusiast. They're not writing for a paycheck, they're writing for passion, and I really respect that. For example, if you remember the last Airman review, I talked about this, I forget the guy's name, but I'll put it up on the screen. A great website, rich of history and resources, from a guy who was just really passionate about the Airman. It's contagious. But that's a great example because he's not there trying to sell you 25 Airmans, right? He might sell one or two from his own collection occasionally, but he's there because he's sharing his passion. To me, in my opinion, maybe I'm a bit old school, but that's genuine watch journalism. The honesty, which I think this is a crucial word today, honesty. A lot of this is lacking honesty, right? Anyway, let's move on. Okay, at number 2, it had to be fake watches. Normally this is number 1. When you buy a fake watch, a counterfeit watch, you are directly giving your money to very, very shady organizations, most often than not. And this is fact, okay? This is fact. And it's amazing how many people dispute this in the comments and refuse to believe it and think, oh, no, it's just, who am I hurting buying a fake watch? No, the people behind it are criminals. They're criminal organizations who have their tentacles in some of the most horrible, I'm not even going to mention it. Look, go to any government law enforcement website, check out the statistics. It always comes back to the same things, truly evil things. So to say a fake watch or a replica never hurt anybody is pure ignorance. But aside from the illegality of it, it's disingenuous. It makes you look bad, and sometimes even it's illegal to possess. And if you unwittingly sell it on, not knowing it's a fake, which is highly unlikely, you're going to be breaking the law too. So in effect, you'll become a criminal yourself. Not to mention, there's no guarantee they will actually work. And I know what the pro replica fans are going to say. Oh, but you can get a super high-end ETA-based, blah, 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 all the rest of it. You can't tell. They're super high quality. They work just like your regular Rolex or whatever. Listen, if you're spending that kind of money, $500 to $1,000, get a real watch. You know what you can buy for a few $100. I've proved it on my channel time and time again. Icons, absolute icons of design and history and movie stars, and with a real story. And you can become part of this community and watch enthusiast community as a whole. Don't miss out and waste your money. So what is number 1? Well, it's got to be frankenwatches. Now, why is it at number 1? I think it's because it's got really bad now. There's so much of it on eBay in particular. And this is the thing. Sometimes it's very sophisticated. I know a friend of mine, and shout out if you're watching, who bought a used Rolex Datejust from a dealer. And actually, this person has a YouTube channel as well. It stopped working. He took it back to him, and basically he was very unprofessional, didn't want to know all the rest of it. Proves exactly my previous point about YouTubers becoming watch dealers, vice versa. Anyway, he took it to his own watchmaker. He had enough of this guy, and they opened it up, full of gunk, needed the service really, really badly. And he did not disclose that there were some unoriginal parts in there. So at first glance, you can't really tell. And so there are varying degrees. Sometimes it's so subtle you can't even tell. Other times it's very obvious. Like if you saw the last episode, I highlighted the affordable level. of all these terrible frankenwatches, and as the name implies, it was components from all kinds of different eras and different styles, different brands, all mishmashed together, predominantly from India on eBay for some reason. And you'd see this kind of Oris or a Fortis or a Seiko with neon dial and then Louis XIV hands. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. These components, these parts are not designed to work in cohesion with each other, so eventually they break down. It's a waste of money. Put that money towards a real watch, from a reputable seller, for not much more, sometimes even for the same amount. Sometimes it's blatant, like you'll see pocket watch conversions that claim to be a Patek. Obviously they go for brands like this because there's a bigger profit margin, right? The size and style will give it away. It's like 45 millimeters. I mean, since when does Patek make a 45? It's a pocket watch. Some parts can even be Patek, That's how smart they can be. Other times they age it. For example, I've seen so many World War II watches that claim they were part of this division, issued here, issued there, and it's just a mishmash. So they exploit history, they exploit brands, they exploit the price range, or it can be sophisticated and just a charlatan watch dealer, on YouTube. It can be, so many different ways, and that's why I think it's worse than the fake watches, because there's so many levels to it. It really targets the new watch enthusiast specifically. Right, so I'm going to leave it there. Please don't forget to add your watches you recommend avoiding in the comments below. Please don't forget to like this video. It really does help. So if you want to support the channel, all I ask is for a like. Very, very simple, guys. Anyway, I'll catch you in the next one. Thank you for watching. Ciao.